Good evening. This is the study session for the Wayne Westland Community School Board of Education is now brought to order on Monday, April 23rd at 2018 at 6:05 p.m. On behalf of the Board of Education, I would like to welcome each and every one of you. Your attendance shows your interest in public education and is greatly appreciated. At this time, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, which is 339.18. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Just look at the, just hold out the line. Because that's the only one we're gonna be doing anyway. So just take notes. So 340.18, roll call of attendance, Ms. Hines.
Mr. Buckaloo,
Present.
Ms. Madison,
Present.
Mr. Cox,
Present.
Ms. Hines present, Ms. Walker,
Present.
Ms. Madell, hello, Dr.
here.
Weaver.
Here.
Let the record show 7-0.
Okay, all are in attendance, thank you. Moving on to item number 341.18, citizen comments, agenda items only. No? Okay, all right. So we're gonna get into the session, but just so everyone know, this is a two-part for us today. So the first half, we're gonna be, it's like a study session on the following agenda items, and then the board is having a small, workshop that's a continuation of a workshop that we had about a month or so ago. As a board, we come together and do different workshops, just team building and things like that. And so the second half would be that. So I have on here 342.18, who's gonna be presenting for Mr. Larson Schuyler?
Mr. Tony Spisak will present the first one, and I'll present the second.
Okay, well, we're ready for you.
You can. Thank
Good
you.
evening, everybody. All right, so we're going to give a little bond schedule update. So at last board meeting, we decided on what configuration we're going to go into. There was a list of, a whole page, a list of items that we've already completed.
Do they have it?
I did not put your, sorry. Pass it down.
So just to give you an update, what I wanted to do was make sure that we were, everyone knew where we were on the bond process timeline, and to reassure us that we are right on schedule with what was planned and, with respect to the bond and moving forward. So we just want to make sure we're updated on that.
Correct. So on the first page, basically, it's just a rundown of what we've already done. The strategic plan, the instructional plan is ongoing, the bond update, all that stuff. And then we got into the choice work, which is item B, which is quite a bit. It was really lengthy, about a year or so of that. And then now we are getting ready for the application for the qualified bonds, so we can submit to the state. And then once that's approved, we will meet with Treasury and go over the application, and then we'll come back for a resolution from the board. And then we have to start working on our bond subcommittees, bringing people together to talk about exactly how we're going to go about the campaign, where we're going to start, all the good stuff that has to go with the bond issue. So there's a whole list of stuff there. And then we finally get down to the actual campaign, and then the election date, and hopefully, God willing, that it will pass. And we will then move forward with the design and development of the actual construction projects and renovations of our schools. Did I do that too fast?
No, you didn't. Is there any questions or concerns that the board might have? No? Okay, Thank you.
Have a wonderful night.
you too.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
343.18, budget process. And you said you were gonna handle
Yes,
it, Dr. Holt?
I have
Okay.
that part. So let me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So, during several meetings, Mr. Larson Scheidler and his team have referred to an academic return on investment process. And so part of the work with his team that he's been working on like the last 5 years is really getting us to a place where we are returning a lot of the financial responsibility to the site, building, and department level, as opposed to keeping things here central. And central is more so responsible for the monitoring and evaluation of these various processes. So academic return on investment, while it's not new to education in general, it is newer to us here in Michigan, and we are on the forefront of this work at the state level as well. And so when I first came on here, finding out at different meetings and talking about AROI, folks were kind of a little skeptical. But here in Wayne Westland, we knew exactly where we wanted to go and how we wanted to get there, because academic return on investment is the process that we determined was going to help us figure out how we were going to evaluate programs district-wide. And we've heard on several occasions that here in Wayne Westland, a lot of our finances is caught up in programs. So Dr. Harmala, during her 3 years here, she was really focused on how do we evaluate programs. And so she went through a 3-year wildly important goal process. That was all a function of the AROI as well. We wanted to find out where we are on our programs, how they're being used, and that's when you saw in the state of the district where I was pointing out how we got from a 20,000 per student ratio at Tinkham to about a 6,000 per student expenditure. It was all through the AROI process. And so when I first got here in around October, November, I can't remember the exact dates, Mr. Larson Scheidler and a team that consisted of site level and central office level personnel went to the AROI conference. And from that, what I asked them to do was, when you return, we need to have a process for how we're going to do AROI in the district, and we need to share that process out. So it's not, so people don't think it's something we're doing behind closed doors, it's a secret. It's very clear exactly how we're going to evaluate programs and exactly how we're going to make decisions and how people can be involved in that process. What you see in front of you is 2 pieces. It's the executive summary of that process, and then there's a more elongated document that talks about this 10-step process that we follow now in Wayne Westland when it comes to onboarding, exiting, and evaluating programs. And in a moment, when you see the way we've restructured, the onboarding, exiting, and evaluation of programs is going to be monitored by, I want to call him doctor, not yet, Mr. Larson Scheidler's department. Because that's where a lot of the financial decisions, at the end of the day, the financial decisions need to be made in the CFO, COO's office. But we need to know, how are these programs going to be evaluated? AROI, or academic return on investment, is how we do that. And so what you see here on the first page is the executive summary, where in many of our programs, we are in step 1, where we're just selecting the programs and figuring out how we're going to evaluate them. The second step when doing a program is to define success. To be honest, this has been an area of growth for us, because we adopt a program and then we'll implement it, but we haven't ever decided in the beginning, what does success look like, so that we can truly say at the end of it, were we successful or were we not? What we've done in many of our programs is we'll adopt the program and implement it and then define success on the back end based on whatever happened, which is what causes a lot of frustration amongst people, because they want to know, well, how are you going to evaluate it? Don't tell me on the back end, tell me on the front end. So that is why, as the team met, and they call themselves the Budget Busters, which I thought was an affectionate name. That if you know Jim's personality, you know it fits perfect. But the Budget Busters team came together and they said, we want to be able to define these. So the first thing is to select the program. Second step is to define success of that program. And we want to define success both by quantitative measures and qualitative measures. So we want it to be, what are the numbers, whether it's student achievement data, perception data, process data, whatever it is, but then also what are the qualitative measures based on how people are feeling about it, maybe their surveys, or whatever the best way to evaluate certain programs. It depends on the program, how we make that determination, but we need to define that. And so that's why he says one of the things that he's looking for is multiple indicators. So Jim is continuing to say to us, all right, if you're going to evaluate it, you can't just choose one metric. It can't just be on NWEA scores. What are the other metrics that we're going to use to define that program?
Can I ask a quick question? Or is it
Yes, ma'am,
appropriate?
please.
Okay, so I have a quick question, because I definitely enjoy this idea. Just like, for instance, like with the Leader in Me, like that's a good program, but everybody's not implementing it the correct way, and we still have the behavior problem. So I like what you're doing, because that's a really expensive program,
Yes.
and getting people to buy into it. And if you have the program that's not changing behavior, you know, like you said, it makes you kind of reevaluate. So
Exactly. And it takes the emotion out of it. because we get emotionally attached to programs for whatever reason, probably because we're human, and that's what we do. But when you really start to get into the analytics, it's not emotional anymore. That's another reason why I wanted to move the evaluation of the program outside of the Office of Academic Excellence. Academic Excellence does implement, and they will do the onboarding process with the BMIO, or Budget Business Maintenance and Instructional Operations. But at the end of the day, we needed to separate where the evaluation lived, because it's very hard to evaluate something you're close to. And Jim is the perfect person in his department. He's like, I'm not close to any of it. I want to know, are we getting an academic return on it or not? And if we are, we move forward. If we're not, then we need to make some adjustments. The next piece in onboarding is design analysis. So we want to do either, he breaks it down into a forward design or a backward design, and then also identifying a comparison group. Forward design is for new programs. So we need to design moving forward how we're going to evaluate or look at these programs. Backward analysis is if a program has already been in place for several years, we're going to use the data over those years to evaluate its performance. And just to give you a scope, at one point when Dr. Harmala was doing this process, she found 93 programs at one campus. 93. You remember that? So having that many programs, and then we wonder, well, where is our money? Well, we can tell you exactly where the money is. It's in the people associated with the programs. Doesn't mean anything wrong with the people, doesn't mean anything's wrong with the program, but we need to have a process to analyze that and really look at it. The next step is to, step 4, collect segment and background data. And this is a piece that gets very technical, and it causes a lot of trepidation amongst us as educators. So from a business perspective, Mr. Larson Scheidler helps us as a collective in the district to really get clear on what exactly are the data levels, how granular are you getting, and is that the best way to do this work? So this is where all of the assistant soups work together on this, but we have to keep forcing each other and pushing one another, especially due to emotional attachment. Step 5, as you can see, collect outcomes data. Step 6, Jim's part. So outcomes data is usually done within Mrs. Peck's department. Cost data is done in Mr. Larson Scheidler's department. Continuing on to step 7, this is where we all come together as a collective, evaluating the program's effectiveness. We want to define the relationship between the investment level and the outcomes. If we're investing a program that costs $6,000 per kid, it doesn't mean we're not going to do that, but are we getting the outcomes that we're looking for $6,000 a kid, considering we get $76.31 per student? And whatever the program is, if we're spending $3,000 a kid, are we getting outcomes that equate to $3,000 a kid? This is where it gets really sticky, because now we're putting a price tag on results, and it's very, very challenging, but we have an entire team, and it is an interdisciplinary team. It's made up of administrators, people from all levels of the organization that really come together and have to make some of those tough decisions. The next pieces are to analyze that cost effectiveness. We draw insight. There's an entire series of questions, and then we take action. The purpose, again, of showing you this is that we have several programs that we've been looking at the last few years that are going to come up, and we may have folks that are very attached to them. We want to make sure everyone knows we took a 10-step process for every one of the programs that we're deciding upon moving this year and beyond. We went through this entire 10-step process. So by the time we took action, which I wrote in the board report about an action we took on a program last week, we've already been through this. And not only one time, we usually go through it about 2 or 3 times, because especially if we're going to take an action that impacts people in their life and positions. We want to make sure we're making the right decision. And so what you have here is the 2-page front and back executive summary. Then this document here, if you just for fun reading, is every step of the process completely fleshed out. And so this is what the information that was shared with Cabinet. It was shared with Leadership Council. And from Leadership Council, it gets shared through the This Week in Wayne Westland to every person in the organization. I'll be honest with you, this is not one of those touchy-feely, feel-good type of processes, but it does give us something to hang our hat on when we're making decisions about programs, so that we know we're not making frivolous decisions. Any questions on that part before I talk about the budget process and how we're adjusting that?
I just wanted to confirm, essentially, that this process would be like-minded of like following the Six Sigma, the lean and daily thinking,
Yep.
SMART goals.
Yep, right in line with that. Because within this, they have to identify their SMART goals. They have to identify all those pieces as we do it on, and now we're going to do it on the front end. because for many of the programs we're evaluating, be honest, this process wasn't done. And so part of the challenge we're having is that they didn't identify their SMART goals, they didn't identify a way to measure it. Now, I've had several programs come to me even say, well, Dr. Holt, how should I measure this? I'm not jumping down that rabbit hole. If we didn't define how we're going to measure it on the front end, I'm not going to come in on the back end and tell you how to measure success on a program you've been doing for 5, 10, however many years. If it's working, we'll see it in the numbers. We'll see it in the student achievement, and we need to be able to at least plan moving forward how we're going to do this work.
You said this process is fairly new to Michigan.
Yes.
Where did it come from?
You know, that would be a Jim question, I'll be honest. I know at MSBO, the Michigan School Business Officials Organization is adopting it and is really asking us to districts to pilot it. I don't know where it came from here for Michigan. I can speak for California where it came from, but I would have to confer with Jim and get back to you on how it came into Michigan. I can tell you in California, we've been using this for about 10 years now. I remember when it started and now the controversy, and it has saved us a ton of work because as educators, we do get emotionally attached. So having to look at data and follow a process helps us to remove that emotional attachment and really focus on what's working for kids and adults. So I can get back to you on that one though, where it
Thank
came
you.
from.
Any other questions?
So the second part of this is that we're moving towards a model, and we've been working, Jim has been working on it about the last 5 years, and finally with the arrival of a new superintendent, I'm saying we need to move forward with this. And it's a way of doing zero-based budgeting. And so if you have, he's been talking about it for years, we've been kind of easing ourselves into it, and Jim and I had our one-on-one. I was like, Jim, we just need to go for it. And we've done enough kind of easing into it. We have several departments that are using it. Maintenance and operation, Tony Spizak is probably our model for zero-based budgeting. And so this year, we're working with the school sites to move towards a zero-based budgeting process. What do we mean by that? It means that now we're looking at our school plans in a different light. Last month, as you saw in the updates, we met, and when I say we, it was the entire OAE team met with every principal individually, and we just asked them to walk through their thinking of their school plan. Just kind of dream for a little bit. Where do you want your school to be? Where do you see it being? Tell us about it. Tell us what you want to do instructionally. What are your areas? And we just wanted the principals to really thought partner with us about where they want to see their schools, where do they see them now, and where do they see them being in the next 5 years. We documented that whole process for them and then asked them to go back and talk about it with their teams and do the same kind of dreaming process with them. From what it wasn't just like dreaming in a bubble. They had to dream according to the data as well. And so we looked at data, we looked at where they are with their instructional focus, we looked at where they are with their climate and culture focus, and each school got about a 4-page document of those notes of just some thinking about how to go back to their school sites and work through their goals. The next step to that is that each of the assistant superintendents is going to follow up with them and a member or two of their team to really iron out what are your goals, and let's help your school plan become a living, breathing document. To no one's fault, the school plans are usually something we do to get title funds. And it's kind of like this rigmarole that we just go through. But they can be very powerful documents when done well to guide everything that you do at your site. Much like what, my goodness, the man's name from MSBO is leaving me. I did our study session. But when he was saying that the school district is run by our strategic plan and our district improvement plan, the schools are run by their school improvement plan. Very similar process. So we had each school walk through that process, and the next step, once they meet with their assistant superintendent, is that then they're going to have a one-on-one with Mr. Larson Scheidler and Mrs. Jen Curry. And they're going to sit down and say, all right, you said you wanted to do all of this, and you said this is what you want to do, these are the professional learning activities that you wanted to have in your school site, this is all the stuff you wanted to do. Let's talk about how much that's going to cost and who you need on your site, and we're going to build your budget from there. The other way we built budgets is we give them a number. Let's say it's 60,000 or whatever it is. It's probably for many of our schools. And then they build their budget based on that $60,000 mark. We want to turn it around. We want you to build your budget based on what you need. And when you tell us what you need, then we'll figure out the best ways to fund those projects. And you put your top priorities, your middle priorities, and then what we always call our wish list. And every principal that's ever done the budget this way, I've done it this way as a principal as well, you really get buy-in on what it is you want to do. It also builds and fosters innovation. Because if I just have $60,000 and I'm working within this very, very closed book, but if I say, no, don't worry about money first. Talk about what you need in order to improve student achievement, improve morale, improve climate and culture on your site, and then let us work with you. Let us tell you what the cap is. And if we, and some sites may not need as much as others. Some sites may, need more, need less. Then we can build the budget in that way and make those decisions. We also now know what our wish list is. This is where grants and other donors, et cetera, come into play, where we have so many people now that we're looking at becoming more community-based that are saying, hey, what do you want us to do? We'll fund it, but we don't have, my principals don't have a wish list. I'm going, hey, where's your wish list? I got somebody that's ready to spend some money, and they haven't done that work yet. I'm like, well, you have to have your wish list ready to go, because if I find somebody that says, I want to dump $20,000 into Schweitzer, then we need to be able to say, part of our plan, the next step to our plan is we want this, and we can move forward with those kind of activities. So zero-based budgeting implies that you start with with the end in mind, and we fund up, versus you start with a dollar amount and you figure out how to spend those monies. And right now we see that play itself out, and I know we've talked about this, Mrs. Medell, that we'll come to the end of the year where we'll have title funds and we'll have people that are just trying to purchase a lot because they have these excess title funds left over. And when you do zero-based budgeting, that part doesn't happen. It really doesn't, because you've already planned for it ahead of time. So we do not want to come into a place where we have to give money back. And this year we are applying for a one-time over 15% carryover, because as you saw in the board update, I stopped a few of the purchases that were just going through just to spend the money. And I'm like, no, we'll apply for the over 15% carryover. We'll carry those funds over, and then we'll spend them much more wisely. You don't have to just rush to spend. We'll carry it over, and we'll figure out a plan for us to spend it. So that's where zero-based budgeting is coming in. I wish Mr. Larson Scheidler was here, so when you talk to him, he'll explain to you. We're very excited about being able to move in this direction. Questions? All right. So the next piece is an update on proficiency.
Okay, so you ready for me to move to the next
Yes,
one?
please. Like, not my meeting. All right. Go ahead.
Okay, item number 344.18, update on proficiency, Ms. Curry.
I gave each of you a packet, just like this. If you pull that out, that would be great. I just want to bring you up to speed on where we are at with our current NWA data. As you know, we take the NWA test 3 times a year. And the first graph that you have in front of you is our NWA reading fall to winter achievement versus growth. If you look at the winter 18 proficiency column, and then next to it is the growth column, your proficiency column on the left is related to proficiency on the MSTEP. So currently, if you look at Adams, there's 18% of students who currently scored at the 60th percentile or higher, which correlates directly to the MSTEP test, which means you have about 18% of your kids be proficient based on that winter test. To the right is their growth. So 62% of the kids at Adams made their RIT score. So that's how you interpret those two different columns. You will see that we have quite a bit of difference in how many kids are scoring at the 60th percentile, and then how many kids are meeting their RIT growth. The chart below is that same information, just presented differently. If you turn the page, that represents, the next page is our fall to winter math scores for each school. Once again, the proficiency is how many students are scoring at the 60th percentile on the NWA test. And on the right-hand side is how many met their projected RIT score from fall to winter. They will take, each student has a projected RIT score as well from winter to spring. And then we will have those results. I think they're done with spring testing. Oh, is it still in the lab? Is that better? We'll do spring testing again. We're currently in the spring testing cycle. It just opened. If you go to the next summary that looks like this, it's going to be very, very similar to what we just spoke of. Is one of the things we really like to look at with our NWA data is that correlation to the MSTEP test of how many kids are scoring at that 60% proficiency. This is a very similar information that we just looked at. The first couple graphs came from IDEX, which is an information system we use. These next reports come right out of NWA through their link study. So again, if you look at Adams Upper Elementary, you see the proficiency bands on this one that correlate to the M-STEP. So it gives you how many kids right now projected based on the winter scores would be in each category from non-proficient to partially proficient, proficient, and advanced. If you are interested in reading that linking study, I can get that for you as well. It's quite interesting how it links our scores right to the M-STEP proficiency levels. So I gave you a copy for the math and for the reading, and these are the reports that the teachers in the schools pull directly from NWA. The last two charts are our quadrants. So I should have labeled these for you. Upper left would be high proficiency, low growth. Upper right would be high growth, high proficiency. Bottom left would be low growth, low proficiency. Bottom right would be high growth, low proficiency. So you can see that all of our schools are either in the low growth, low proficiency or high growth, low proficiency as you look at these graphs. So these are a picture or a snapshot of where we are currently. We're also looking at the trend data over the years to see if we had those consistent scores. And then we will pull this same data again in the spring as soon as the testing window closes.
Say with the top two high.
Sure. So the top left is high proficiency, low growth,
Okay.
and the top right is high growth, high proficiency.
Okay.
So you can see, even flipping back to the very, very first page, quite of our kiddos, you know, we are struggling. Having that relationship of being able to use the NWA test and see how it correlates with M-STEP is pretty powerful. And especially to know that the kids have to score in the 60th percentile of the NWA, that would be a projected proficiency on the M-STEP test. Any questions?
If we take, I'm sorry, if we take Walker, tag kids out of that, or is tag kids in there?
Tag kids are
in.
currently in here.
That's what I
Yes, yes. Good question.
And as we progress through the graph, while we start at the low growth, low proficiency, typically we'll go into the next one, which is the high growth, low proficiency, and then we'll head up. So we're looking for a trajectory where schools are going across and then up. While we would love to see us straight up, it just doesn't happen that way. They jump in as, oh gosh, we're seeing growth. Much like you see on that first chart where you see all those ones in green, that you're seeing the growth percentage. That's the piece right now as we look at benchmarks, you want to see that growth to start with. We're not there with proficiency, we know. But if we could start really focusing on getting a lot of growth amongst our kids, they will eventually grow to being proficient. And that's what we're aiming for, is getting that growth process to happen faster. We need, essentially, we need more than 1 year's growth over 1 year's time. We're looking at doing at least 1.5 to 3 years growth in 1 year's time. That's what we have to see in order to really move towards proficiency, which is possible. It's very possible with the right tactics. I've seen it happen. We used NWEA in my previous districts, and you'll start to see that growth happen. We're even seeing it right now if you look at Adams. Take a look at Adams and the way they're growing. You wouldn't know it from their proficiency, but they are growing like crazy, which is good.
And they see when you look at growth, think of a bell curve, right? So if you're making 50% growth, that's pretty good. So they're definitely, as she pointed out, I mean, we're definitely moving kids when we look at that growth.
Dr. Weaver.
I guess my question is, or my thought is, how can we, or maybe we do, so just kind of think about that, but we come to a certain grade and we just start testing for this stuff. What could we do at the elementary level to begin preparing the kids for these types of tests?
I can
Or
give you
could
an
anything be done?
Sure. So one, I think, example, right, we have kindergartners take this test, right, who truly sometimes have no computer skills or just test-taking skills. NWA, what we do is they do offer I'm not even necessarily call it a practice test, but you can take kindergartners to the computer or to the lab, have them manipulate the screen, move the mouse around, which is so important because they do the test online. So you want to give our kids those test-taking strategies, and you want to do it consistently across the board so that my kindergarten class is going in. We want to make sure all kindergartners have those same skills, those test-taking strategies prior to going in. It's those type of things that we can give to them. You truly cannot teach to the NWA tests, but what you can do is use your results, and you can break it down into the strands, and then as a teacher, you can see, are my kiddos struggling in math concepts? Is it foundation skills in reading? And then I can pull those small groups in my classroom and work on specific skills with kids.
Okay, the other question I had was, I mean, I hate to sound this way, but I'm looking at this chart of 4, and I'm kind of gasping for breath here that our district is not proficient as we'd like them to be, where each high school's rolling out $4, $5, $6 million in scholarships every year, and you know, we have 10 or 12 or 14 valedictorians for each class that graduates. I mean, where are we missing it is the big question. Where are we missing this? Why are our kids not proficient?
You know, we are just as eager as I would say to you to find that exact answer as we can. Some of the things as we look at our trend data and see where we're struggling, we know we're struggling in math. We know we're struggling in reading. And that is part of the reasons why we're moving forward with, we know we need a new ELA curriculum. We know that instructional coaches are going to be able to collaborate with our teachers, really personalize teachers' learning, and give teachers their own personal growth paths to improve student achievement. So we know what we need to do. It's just a matter of giving it time and implementing with fidelity so we can move forward to see those scores increase. Because I agree with you, we can now look at our trend data and know what we're currently doing. We need to do better, or it's not working.
I would add on to what Mrs. Curry said, that we have also really been focused on rigor. As schools have been going through the instructional rounds process, we are realizing, and this is where the depth of knowledge charts are coming in, we're realizing that there are 4 levels of depth of knowledge. Level 1 is more recall. Level 4 is making meaning of new material. When we are doing our rounds at all levels of the district, it doesn't really matter. At this point, I'm out of the process, and the team is really taking the process forward, which is beautiful. But we are noticing that the majority of our instruction, even now in March and April, is still at level 1. And so the rigor with which we're teaching is not matching with the level of rigor of how we're expecting kids to respond. This also came out in the Hewling study that we did on John Glenn High School. And that information was in your packet, so you could see how kids and teachers are saying, hey, we need some help with this. And so really it's answering the call that our students, our teachers, and our administrators are saying, we want to learn how to teach with more rigor. And what we mean by that is if you're teaching a concept, don't teach it at the lowest level, the recall level. We need to really get to the point where we're teaching it at higher levels, and we need to know what that looks like collectively. So we've spent the majority of our time this year, you may have heard about principals being pulled out twice a month for training. Their training is walking around classrooms with one another, calibrating their lens on how they see classroom instruction. Because as we walked around, we noticed that just like there are 8 people sitting up here, you'd have 8 different ways we would see the same exact classroom. And one person would say it's the greatest thing they've ever seen. Another person would say, huh? And we had to really get together on what it is that we're seeing and really calibrate around that. So the Office of Academic Excellence leaders are now working with principals on a weekly basis, essentially, on how do we view rigor. Our principals are now having those conversations with their leadership teams. Some of them jumped on it, others of them are just still really trying to do their own learning. So this year has been focused on principal learning and leader learning so that we can calibrate our lens. Moving forward, we're going to start looking at the leadership team learning. Then after that, we start addressing the teacher's level of learning, because if we don't understand it, they can't understand it. So that's another piece where we're looking at addressing that.
Hold on one second, I think, Mrs. Hines had her
Yep.
hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question too, because my son, he takes the test and he complains about the length of time, like the kids that sit there to have the patience to take these tests. You know, is there a way, like, as a parent, we can help prepare children on how to take tests?
Absolutely. Stamina, and I don't know if you want to take this one, Curry, but stamina has been an issue. Even when we were there, when the students, we happened to be at Glenn the day that they were taking the SAT. And the kids were just coming out of there, and they just did not have the stamina, even at the 11th grade level. And this was only after I want to say the first hour and 15 minutes. They were already losing stamina. And that's a 3-hour exam. You've got to be able to last and be cognitively functioning at a high level for the entire 3 hours. And many of them just weren't there.
And I think even with NWA, if you get a kindergartner who's reading, the test gets harder. As you get more right, so the reading passages get longer and longer. So think about it. If you have a really smart first grader who's reading at a 4th grade level, all of a sudden you have a 6-year-old who test is getting longer and longer, right? And then they think, holy cow, because the test is going to fluctuate. And again, if you have a struggling 3rd grader, that test is going to back it up at the same time. So test-taking strategies are always good to use, whether it's with the kindergartner or even a 10th grader.
So a couple of strategies that parents can do. You can access Compass Learning at home. You can now access, and you have little badges for the little ones. AJ comes home with his little badge. You can put it in front of the computer, and he can start getting on those exams. Stamina is a big piece, so we do recommend, their chronological age +4, so like AJ's 5, so he needs to be able to read for a straight 9 minutes. And and you have to kind of force them and sit there, so no, keep reading. So you're building up that stamina at home for kids to learn how to read. By the time they get to high school, they need to be able to read for a good 45 minutes straight you just got to be able to stay focused. And that comes from nothing but practice.
Dr. Weaver?
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Curry, I hope that you don't think I've attacked you in any way.
Not at all.
I just-
You can ask me anything you want.
Well, I guess the frustration is that over 13 years, maybe pretty close to 14 years of board service, this is where we are. And it's not changing. And somehow, and I don't have those answers, or I'd be making millions of dollars like you are. But somehow, the dynamic in teaching or what we're doing with our students, something has to change to move these numbers. And I wish I had the answers, but I hope that 3, 4, 5 years from now, we're not still asking that question.
I truly believe that with rigor, instructional coaching, and our 5 dimensions, those 3 connect so well that I truly believe, and I've been in the district a very long time, I truly believe that those pieces are going to move us forward.
Thank you.
I do. You're welcome.
Mr. Buckaloo?
Yeah, a couple of comments and then a question. First, this is going to be a community effort, isn't it?
Yes.
No teacher in the classroom is going to be the answer. It's going to take parents, it's going to take a lot of people trying to bring these students to the point where they have the stamina, where they have the desire to succeed on these tests. Second comment, it's not going to be an easy task. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it. This is very difficult. It's going to be dig your feet into the ground and get a good traction and push and pull and maybe bite and scratch. It's going to be difficult. For the question, and I kind of missed it. You were talking about Bloom.
Blooms
Okay.
and Web's Depth of Knowledge, yeah.
Okay, and so we're at level 1. And we obviously want to go to level 2 or even level 3 or whatever. Is there some trigger in the course of teaching a semester where we see a amount of student proficiency that says, okay, now we go on to level 2, or do we just go on to level 2 because it's time? How do we tell our teachers, okay, get off 1, get on to 2? What is that?
You start, Noah.
I think part of that, so we've had that discussion, because as we go through our instructional rounds, and we see that everybody's on the same playing field, meaning we're seeing a lot of DOK ones. We need, with principals and then our teachers and our staff, we need to have those rich conversations of what does a DOK2 look like? What does that mean? How do I get my students there? We can't expect that teachers know that or realize that. Or they may realize how to, but they need some additional tools from us. So part of it is just having those rich conversations of awareness first. Then a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, it's just maybe tweaking one thing that would get them to that next. It could be an additional question or a tell me more. Or instead of the teacher talking, it's having student talk in the classroom. And a lot of times they start to lead those discussions, and those discussions take to higher levels of rigor.
So, in cruder terms, we're expecting our teachers to drag the kids up Bloom's taxonomy
I don't know.
by adding that question.
I think it's by us giving our teachers some additional skills and tools in order to get their kids to that higher level.
And so essentially what we're talking about is a level of thinking. And a part of it is, one kind of thinking doesn't preclude another. So for example, does a kid need to have DOK level 1 understanding? Yes. But they don't have to have a solid foundation at DOK level 1 to move to level 2. And that's a lot of the mindset that we have. Oh, I have to wait until everybody's got it, and then I can move along. And the way that, that teaching is shifting now, and it's different even from when I was in the classroom, because when I was in the classroom, I waited till everybody came along, and then I moved to my next one and my next one. Now we're saying, well, instead of doing that, design your project in such a way that it will allow that higher level of thinking while you continue to bring the laggers along. And so it's those tips and strategies, it's those little tweaks to your lesson that you can do, that you can have kids at DOK 4 and DOK 1 on the same task at the same time. And it's okay. It's all in how you've designed your lesson in order to do that. And we didn't, I'll be honest, we didn't design lessons like that when I was in the classroom. These are skills that I learned over time from an administrative seat that I've seen teachers and others be able to implement very well when they have the tools to do it. But right now, this is the first we're even really engaging in this level of conversation around this type of work and saying, hey, what would it take to take that lesson and turn it up just a small notch to a level 2? Oh, if I asked the kids why they said that, it would tell me a little bit more about their thinking. Exactly. And so adding on questions and how they address those questions does move them along, and it doesn't mean that you have to have everybody on board before you do. That notion in and of it itself is a step in the right direction, and that was one of the epiphanies that we had at a recent, because we have these meetings with our administrators now, and there was kind of an epiphany. They went, oh, you don't have to wait. No, you don't have to wait. And we've been spending decades waiting and saying, oh, we'll teach to the middle, differentiate. And we don't need to teach to the middle. We just need to understand what each of those 4 levels looks like, and then be able to move throughout those levels throughout the lesson through very skillful facilitation. And that's very possible for a teacher at any level when they know how.
And so we're preparing ourselves to give our teaching staff those diagnostic tools that will allow them to make those kinds of decisions.
Exactly. And we're starting with the administrators having them first, because an administrator can't coach something that they don't understand themselves. And so if the administrators are supposed to be the instructional leaders for their site and be able to walk teachers through this, they have to have that skill set. Then they can start walking teachers through that skill set through a series of feedback questions.
Mr.
Thank you.
Cox?
Dr. Holt, earlier when you mentioned that you had building administrators going through the different classrooms in their buildings, looking at how things were being done in those classrooms and trying to gain a perspective on what was going on, how similar is one teacher doing things relative to the next teacher? It seems to me in order to really get any value out of, and I like a system where we can fairly judge how well what we're doing is working.
Mhm.
But if everybody is doing things differently, how prevalent is that? And was there any epiphanies with respect to that process?
Any
that
of you
we
guys
can-
wanna take it? I can take it, but I know you've been doing these a lot more than I have. I just debrief on them afterwards.
So when a team goes out to a building, and I think last time we were at Walker Winter was one of them, we have groups, so we hit pretty much every single classroom in that building. And what we are finding is that when we look at their depths of knowledge, they are doing very similar things. There are outliers, right, where we might say each group went into Mrs. Smith's room and we happened to see a DOK level 3. But for the most part, consistency is within that DOK level 1. So part of that, and then when we're sharing that information with the principals, they then kind of lead their teams through. They could even say, well, could you give me more specifics? Could you tell me which classroom that was, what the lesson was? Did the subject lead itself to a higher level of DOK? So then they start those discussions within their buildings as well. But we are, for the most part, seeing the same things and the same levels. Would you, anything or anything to add to that?
I can.
Because you've been with.
So I think, and maybe I'll get a little closer to what you're looking for. When we go out and we do these instructional rounds, we come back as a team and we debrief on what did we see, and then and our groups will identify. We saw on average DOK 1 in the classroom. If somebody says, I saw a DOK 3, you have to defend. What did you see that validated that that was a DOK 3? So as we're learning and understanding this matrix together, we're then starting to kind of add more into our toolbox. Now, the next step in this process is scale professional learning. So our educators, our instructional leaders in the building are learning what to be looking for. So now they're going to bring their teachers along next year in the cognitive rigor matrix. We might not be ready to have teachers go into other teachers' classrooms and go through this process because we just might not be there yet. We're going to get there, but one of the ways that we're already planning on getting there is using video. So we've got videos of teacher X, so we can start developing that learning and understanding of what would have taken me to a DOK 3 in this lesson. What we're seeing and what we've come to the conclusion of, and this is over our own learning. Our facilitator didn't tell us this. We came to this conclusion on our own that when we start focusing on what the student is doing and not what the teacher is doing, we move to DOK 3. It's an easy leap. It's, as educators, we're taught to be teachers. So we focus a lot of our time in our teacher preparation programs on how do you be a teacher? You do this, 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 and this. And at the end of the day, sometimes we have really tired teachers because they're doing all of that work. Whereas in our higher order thinking classrooms where those DOK 3s and 4s are being exhibited, the commonality is that students are doing the majority of the thinking. And it's where when students are thinking together, they're learning at a much greater level. And as the Common Core, as we know, and we've talked a lot about assessments and testing, the Common Core is looking for that type of application. It's not looking for recall. It's not looking for that rote information back. It's looking for how do you apply what you just read. So it's imperative that we get to that level as instructors. But we know we're not going to point to one teacher and say, okay, if you just do this differently, we're going to learn and grow through that together.
I know that Tom said it's a community effort. It's an everybody effort, but we don't have jurisdiction over everybody. We only have jurisdiction over what goes on in our schools. And to the extent that a student can concentrate on a particular process for the time they need to, how stark was the realization that they were a third of the way there, a half of the way there, to you?
It was shocking. But it revealed to me at least, here's the area that we can get the biggest, I don't wanna say bang for our buck, but I just said it out loud. But, I mean, we have to focus on those, on the big rocks first, right? And that's a
I
big
think
rock.
we always, well, I always had a philosophy through the years, like Dr. Weaver, I was here 20 years ago. If we could just make fourth grade class sizes smaller and improve reading, everything would come as a consequence of that. But I just don't know if so much has changed in the way students learn. I don't know if that's the magic answer.
There are no magic answers, and that's why us learning and understanding the way learning happens is critical. There is no, it's not class size, it's not building, it's not configurations, it's none of that and all of that. And at the end of the day, we have to get really good at knowing what learning looks like. And that's what we're getting good at, is knowing what is smart cognitive processing amongst a child at the 3rd grade, 11th grade, or kindergarten level. What does that look like, sound like, feel like when we're in the classroom? And can we identify that? And now that that administrators across the district are looking at instruction in this way, they're all having these realizations. Oh, well, you mean they're not just quiet in their seats and that means they're learning? Absolutely not. A quiet classroom is honestly one where I go, uh-oh, what's going on? Because the more, the one who's doing the talking is doing the learning. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on. And we're finding that as administrators are starting to realize this and move their teams to that, they're starting to focus differently. Whereas before, we were getting a lot of requests for technology. Now they're going, well, wait a minute. You mean the computer's not the answer? Going, yes, the computer is not the answer. What are they doing on the computer? How are they talking about the learning amongst one another? And what level are we expecting of them? How is whatever the kid is doing in front of you, what level of thinking are they required to do for that? And this is where you'll hear us saying, if kids are just writing dictionary definitions out of the dictionary, that's DOK 0. It's not even DOK 1. Copying is DOK 0, because there's no cognitive processing needed for me to copy these words right off of Dr. Weaver's thing here. But if I'm asking them now to maybe use it in a sentence, which is not also, that's maybe a DOK 1. Now I'm having to take that word, look at it, and use it in a sentence. Okay. Now, if I have to use that word in context within a paragraph that's on a topic that may be very novel to me, now I may be entering DOK 2 or 3. So you see how we take this one concept and we can make it as rigorous or not rigorous as we choose. But we have to choose more rigor. And so that's where we're getting people into the mindset of how do you choose more rigor as you're designing your lessons? And the first step is to know what rigor looks like. So the process that she's been following and adjusting and the data that we're seeing, we're going to see the increases the more we increase the learning amongst our people.
Well, I know that we need a system with which to assess, but we don't have time to create that wheel. So obviously this exists now, even though we haven't been using it. Where did this come from?
So this is from Instructional Rounds, which is by Doug Lamov. We had actually already started delving into it. I'll be honest with you, I haven't brought a whole bunch new. I've really just taken what we were already doing and kind of put it on steroids, for lack of a better term. So we were already, I walked into the office and I found the Instructional Rounds books. I was like, oh, okay, we're already using Instructional Rounds. I called a colleague of mine. I'm like, you know what? I don't have the time to walk them through this process. Let's start walking them through the process like ASAP. Just have them start to think about depth of knowledge. They had already been doing the work, I want to say from 2 or 3 years ago, where they added Instructional Rounds, and I just took it and ramped it up. Same thing with the 5D, 4D, 3D, and the restructuring the departments. I didn't create anything new. I took what we were already doing within our strategic plan, and I just put it on steroids and made it move faster, because we got to move a little bit faster than we have been.
And what level of enthusiasm? I mean, obviously, I can't be the only one. I know that Dr. Weaver isn't the only one that's not happy about that. The professionals in the buildings, they want better results than this.
They do. And the feelings that they have every time they see their scores, that's what I'm trying to eliminate. I know they're working hard. And every time they see these results, it's like a gut punch. And so I mentioned at the last meeting, I can improve 2 things when it comes to my employees. I can improve salary, and I can improve working conditions. Well, we're working on negotiations for the future. I can't improve salary right now, but I can improve working conditions. I can improve the way and the manner in which we work so that we work smarter, not harder. And that's been our focus. Then we'll focus on negotiations.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Mrs. Madison?
if you could just bear with me, because I had a few light bulb moments that I kind of want to get out. I want to kind of share with the board for each other of us to kind of hear and think about tonight, along with the listening audience and those at home will be watching later on. A light bulb moment that I just had is, as you said, Dr. Holt, these are processes that we've always had. One of my frustrations from growing up in the community, being a product of Wayne Westland Community Schools, and then moving forward, being a parent in the district and then now on school board, has been finding the pieces of disconnect. It's like the puzzle's been laid out on the board, but the pieces were never put together, or some were always put in a wrong slot. And one of the refreshing light bulb moments that I just heard you say, with all of the tools that we've had, that you, for the best term, putting on steroids, is I know even I've heard within the board and within staff in the district has been following the processes of the way things used to be, such as disciplinary actions, delivering the materials, and how to structure a classroom day for the students and planning that out. And one of the things that I had started learning going back to college was that I started struggling as a student with the learning process. And I had some professors pull me aside, and that was kind of the light bulb here tonight, is recognizing that the tools of what used to be for teachers who had been teaching for 20 years, those tools are irrelevant. You didn't deal with disciplinary concerns or getting the attention of all your students and not having to worry about a cell phone or whatever electronic device the student may bring into the classroom, or any of today's worries. They weren't there yesterday. So I'm hearing a lot more thinking in depth of how to restructure that thought process, let alone students today are much more wittier than what they were back then because of the electronics and all of the stimuli at such an early age. So I'm hearing a new shift of thinking that's refreshing for me to hear, that it's like the elephant in the room. We're here, we're talking about it, it's there. So I'm seeing great hope for the fact that, you know, there is the full buy-in, that, you know, this is something that we have had that's just been sitting there as the elephant in the room, and now it's just applying it differently to making it work for us, and also keeping in mind our demographics and what students do have at home and what they don't have at home. And I know we've thrown around a lot of acronyms tonight and a lot of things that are probably beyond most average person's thinking of the process of how our district runs. So I kind of just want to put it simply out there too, to keep in mind when we say the community, it's not just looking at just the parent to that child. Maybe that parent doesn't have the resources. Maybe they don't know how to obtain the resources. So it's about looking at your child's friends, looking at your relatives' children, looking at your neighbor's children, looking at the children who come into your business. It's about every single adult reaching out to every child in our community. And then we can get every child on board and bring every child up, even if that child's parent cannot do it, they're getting reached by somebody. And I think that's the most important thing here tonight too, is making sure that we express for everybody to reach out to at least one child. And if you don't know, start with the school. If you're not sure where to go, we have plenty of numbers. If you don't have a phone, use somebody's phone. If you can't use a phone and you can't use a computer, call. Whatever you have to do to reach out, ask somebody, because I know everybody's always willing to help in this community. It's just somebody being brave enough to ask.
Thank you, Mrs. Madison. Mr. Cox, you wanted to say something again?
Well, I wanted to piggyback on this comments. This is a positive direction. This is a path to at least understanding the entire scope of the problem, and I'm encouraged by that. And even though I know that there are factors which we can't influence that affect each student's ability to comprehend this material, I know that every student regardless of their proficiency test, are brilliant. They have no problem. As a matter of fact, many of these students who are having difficulty, and I don't know if people are giving some time to these test scores.
Right.
These people, these students in large part are dealing with many more challenges in their life. And they're still in school every day. They still have a social network. They can, they know how to use this iPhone probably a lot better than I do. And all of, they don't have an inability to learn.
No.
So then it falls upon us to recognize that maybe the way we're teaching isn't the way they're best learning. And so we have to be the ones that change things. So certainly this should at some point tell us that that's what's going on here. And I'm glad it's on steroids, because as we're sitting here talking about it, kids are in school today.
Right.
Exactly.
Getting their education today. So this can't wait, and so I'm encouraged by that. I just wanted to add that comment.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Next item. Thank
So,
you.
okay, thank you. So we're gonna move on to item number 345.18, restructuring update. Dr. Holt.
All right, and so please each take a packet. And I'm going
Thank
to
you again, Ms.
start
Curry.
by reviewing business, maintenance, and instructional operations. And then I'll give each assistant superintendent the opportunity, since they're here, to review what's going on with their departments. Essentially, as I wanted to give you this yet again. I know I spoke about it in an overview at the State of the District address, and for our entire community to see where did this come from. So long story short, the 2-minute version is, when I got here, Dr. Harmala had assigned Mrs. Peck to do the work of adopting an evaluation tool or framework for us to look at. And as I came here and I started to do my walkthroughs and listen to people, there was one thing that folks across the board said was done well, and nobody really, there weren't a lot of complaints about it, I'll put it that way. It wasn't oh goodness, this could have happened. They said this one process was done very well, and it was done by Mrs. Peck, and that was the adoption of the 5D instructional framework as our evaluation tool. And so hearing that that was the one thing that everybody agreed on, I started to investigate it more. And the more I investigated, we went from 5D, then which is for teachers, 4D, which is the instructional leadership framework, and that's around leadership. And that's our leadership framework and how we evaluate administrators. Then we found what Mrs. Peck affectionately termed 3D, which is the three-dimensional framework of central office transformation. So the model that she adopted had with it how to adjust your central office, central support framework to meet the needs of the 5D. So, well, wait a minute. Why don't we just do what the people that we've adopted this information from are telling us to do? So we brought a team together, and we started to talk about it, and we started to evaluate where we were with leadership and support from central office. The more I heard, the more I listened, the more I said, okay, we need to restructure our entire district to meet the needs of the 5 dimensions, because that's how we're evaluating our educators. That's the framework with which we want to move forward instructionally. So our entire district should be focused on that. It makes perfect sense. So I started to really look at it, and based on the climate and culture of our district, I could not share very much with the public. I shared with a few on the board, but because folks were just very tense, having a new administrator, a new superintendent, the climate wasn't one where we could really be collaborative. So I worked with partners from Wayne Risa. Dr. Randy Liepa provided me a coach and someone to help mentor me through this process, and we really came up with how do we redesign or restructure the school district so we can meet the needs of what we're asking our teachers to do at the ground level with our children. And that is where we came up with the idea of 5. And I knew we had 5 top leaders in the district already, with having 3 assistant superintendents and 2 senior executive directors. So I was going for a model of 5. And so I kept with that model of 5, and I also redistributed the district amidst those 5. I worked very closely with the first of the 5 areas, which was business, maintenance, and instructional operations. And as you can see here, and I'll do this for Mr. Larson Scheidler, but if you're we can definitely do it again, and he can share with you his perspective. But when I was talking to him, there were a couple of areas that were of frustration. All of our finances were not being controlled in one area. That was one of the first things when the partnership agreement folks were coming in. They were saying, well, why do you have your finances in a few different areas? And I couldn't answer why. I really couldn't. I was like, well, I don't know why we have them. Why we have categorical funds in one place, we have grant funds in another place, which is another way to say categoricals. And then we had some grant funds in business office, and other grant funds were not in business office. And so Jim and I would have conversations, and I'm like, do you want it all? He was like, please, give it. It would be great to be able to, have all the finances in one place. And so that was the impetus, or kind of the start for the instructional operations. We also noticed that within the instruction department, the former instruction department, the majority of our time was spent dealing with operational issues. So for example, if we have either a disciplinary issue or a technological hardware issue that would happen, that would take precedence over dealing instructional rounds. And the same people that are doing instructional rounds are dealing with that tech issue. That tech issue, if your computer goes down, I'm not doing instructional rounds today. I got to get your computer up so that you can actually run class. And the more and more we did that, the more we realized instruction kept getting pushed to the back burner. So Jim and I had a conversation, and that's why you see in his org chart, we have a significant increase in two areas. We have a significant increase in BMIO, or Business Maintenance and Instructional Operations, and then the creation of the Climate and Culture Department. The reason being, we took everything that was instructional operations, meaning that if it's technology hardware, it goes over there with Jim. Because whether or not you have a computer and it's working is not an impact on what you're doing on the computer. What you're doing on the computer is an instructional matter. Whether or not the computer or the dot cam has the bulb or whatever it is that it needs to make it operate is an operational matter that needs to be in operations. So he and I agreed to take everything that was instructional operations and put it over in BMIO. And so what you see here is everything that is going into operations, and the only piece that we have not, we're still fleshing out, is special education, and I'll explain to you why. Within here, you'll see that he still has business and finance, which is the same as before. Food and nutrition services did not adjust much. Skipping instructional operations, moving over to maintenance operations, technology and communications, hardware and infrastructure. The main change here was adding technology and communications, hardware and infrastructure over into BMIO. So now anything having to do with the telephones, believe it or not, the telephones were in instruction. Telephones, no, what we say on the telephone, yes, but the actual operation of the phone system, I let the people who are experts in that department figure that out, and now it's over there. Transportation, nothing much shifted, and so the two big pieces you'll see on the bottom here, where you see instructional operations and state and federal programs, those are the additions to the BMIO department. So we moved the state and federal programs, Title I, at-risk funding, Act 18 grants. Those are the large and major pieces of finance work that is now being supervised by business maintenance and instructional operations. So now instead of looking at just the general fund part of the budget, now he can truly do zero-based budgeting, because he can look at the entire budget and say, oh, this can be funded here, this can be funded here, and he works that out. That way we don't have to think about that over in instruction. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Same thing with operations. So pupil support, enrollment, we were spending more time on enrollment over here in the instruction department than anything else, because we moved enrollment here centrally. Enrollment's going to move over into instructional operations, because getting a child in school is not part of what we need to worry about in academic excellence. Once they're in, and what we do with them, what programs they're in, what class they need to be in, how to differentiate for their learning, that's where they need to focus. But getting the paperwork filled out and your light bill or your driver's license or whatever it is that you need to have, that's not a piece that academics needs to worry about. So he has all of those pieces now in instructional operations. And what you see behind that is the first drafts of our 5-year plan. And what I wanted to show you is that our first retreat as a leadership team, we focused on taking our strategic plan from 2016 to 2020, our current partnership agreement, and what we knew we needed to do, because we've been in the district. We're like, okay, well, what are the things we really, really need to do in addition to that? And we put all of those into 5-year plans. So what you see here, and each of them it's all draft form right now, but I wanted to give you an update. where you see the numbers, so you see on his where he said number 2017-18, number 7, number 8, number 3, number 4, those are numbered goals from the strategic plan, 2016 to 2020. Every single one of the 22 goals is now distributed amongst the various departments, and some of them have been stretched out a bit because they were very, very ambitious, and while I love the ambition, some of it's just not realistic. So we didn't want people to feel like they weren't accomplished because there were some things that were supposed to be done like in 2016-17 that weren't done. It's like, it's okay. Let's not, it was a little overzealous to think it was going to get done that quick because they realized it was big work, but let's stretch it out over time and stretch it out over the amidst multiple people so that we can truly get some legs behind this important work. So you see here, these are all the goals that fit under Mr. Larson Scheidler. So he has number 7 and 8, which he knows by the end of this year he will finish, and we'll be able to check those off. Goals number 3 and 4, he's really going to focus on next year. That's the bond issue and ensuring resources support staff compensation. That's where negotiations comes in, because everything while he's preparing for it now, he wants to culminate that in 2018-19, and then in 2019-20 he will focus on goal number 6. And then below that, you can see the various projects that he's going to be working on throughout the entire course of the 5 years, but we put in the, I asked them to put the item in the year that they believe that they'll be able to culminate it or finish it and be able to move towards monitoring. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So this covers the first draft, and again, it's a draft of how we've taken all of the plans that we've been looking at, everything that we've been learning, and tried to put it all together into a very nice fluid framework. All right, and so any questions on BMIO? All right, so you want to do yours? Or you okay to do? Well, I'm sure.
You might need to speak into the mic so it can be.
There you go.
Do you need a copy? Sorry about that. Okay, so for the org chart, is that what you want me to start to review?
They just have the front page, the puzzle piece, and your 5-year draft.
Okay. So I'm happy to report that the department has been restructured, and I have filled the positions that we had open, with the exception of the 3 Family Resource Center specialists, because we are expanding. We are interviewing this Friday and hoping to make the final recommendations to fill those 3 positions. They will be located, we're keeping the the Adams location, and then we are adding Taft and John Glenn for the Family Resource Centers to hit the district. So with that, you have a copy of the puzzle piece for the ECGR department. And that goes, and then attached to that is a very rough draft of the 5-year plan. So again, the items listed as goals, those are from the district strategic plan. The biggest pieces are contract negotiations are going to be coming up, involving or getting that family and community engagement piece up and running, working with community partners, and then staff retention and helping staff feel valued. So those are really the biggest pieces that we're working on over the next 5 years in our department.
Any questions on
Any
that?
questions on that department? Mr. Cox?
Well, as we have a conversation about instruction and what goes on in the classroom and how much things has changed in the way that students are learning, I'm looking at the community engagement, and I'm wondering, that's true for that as well. And a very important part of this, your responsibilities, especially moving forward, is going to be community engagement. So what can we expect in terms of kind of bringing our ability to interact with the community? I know we have a website, and if people desire to learn information, they can go to our website and they can find it. But that's not always the best way. You know, if you want to become a doctor, you could do like Abraham Lincoln, I guess, and you could sit in your log cabin, you can read. But that's not the way people are going to learn, and we need them to learn. So on that part of the responsibility, what are we going to be doing to be effective at that.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear about getting the families involved. So I think this takes a whole community approach. I live in the community as well and have students in the district at Wayne Memorial. So I understand the importance of it takes a village to raise a child. So I am very fortunate to have Amanda Dibus and Maria Mitter supporting this new initiative in the district to get families in. They are already starting education forums for families and inviting them in. The first one is on social media, especially following the threats and things that are going on in schools across the country. So they're having education seminars. We're expanding our family resource centers so that our families, their basic needs can be met so that they can focus on then getting their kids into school. Kids are going to come to school. Hopefully they'll have the resources they need. They'll be fed, they'll be clothed, they'll have a home. And we're going to help the families that are struggling in those areas so that education can be a primary focus now rather than their basic needs.
Well, that addresses the kids that are having challenges or that they require additional resources in order to be at the same starting block that everybody, but what about the kids that aren't in that position? What about their parents and their families? How are we going to be able to interact moving forward?
So we have proposed parent volunteer or parent coordinators in each of the buildings to help build that. So it's going to be an option that our principals have to staff these paid positions. So they're not just parents that are just in the building volunteering, but it can actually be a paid position part-time for someone to come in and kind of get that other, parents sometimes are more comfortable interacting with other parents rather than administrators or staff. So we'll have an opportunity for each school to have a parent volunteer coordinator that will help draw more families into the building. And then I believe if parents are more involved in the buildings and involved in the school, that's going to trickle down at home, and they're going to be able to share the education pieces at home and the goals, and they're going to be more aware of what's going on in the buildings and more aware of what it is they need to work with their children with at home.
In
And I had
addition to
some-
that, I just want to add on to that real quick. And in addition to that, we're also exploring the use of Parent University. So we're looking at, I know Maria and Amanda are both looking at how we can educate our parents so that they're more aware of what's happening in our community. We have classes for that. We're also looking at, as we can see here, that the connection between the community organizations and the schools. So you've heard me mention before, getting a faith-based organization, a community-based organization, and a financial institution connected to each and every school. Because with each of those connections comes professional development and learning opportunities for parents when they're already doing things out in the community to also connect with the school personnel. So we're looking for various ways that we can connect our schools and communities. And they just actually gave me an updated chart this morning, and I put it up, well, we can look at it when we get back into the cabinet room, where we're looking at each school and where you are on that. And some of our schools have multiple partners, and you can tell based on the types of events that they have, and others of our schools have no partners. And we're definitely seeing a correlation between the activity at the site and the number of partners that the school already has. And we want to encourage more of our community to get involved. So we're looking at various measures, and to be honest, with having the community liaison network, which is a piece that we borrowed from another local district, with having our parent liaisons, our staff member, and us here centrally, we'll have our first district communications or district liaison meeting coming up. I want to say it's tomorrow. Is today the 23rd? Yes. So it's tomorrow, where we have our first meeting where we're having a representative from each school, a representative, a staff, and a parent, and us here centrally, and we're going to talk about just that. How do we get more people involved? What do your people need to see? How do they best need to be communicated with? Because it's different than at Wildwood, than it is at Grand, than it is at Glenn, than it is at Wayne. It's different. And we can't just expect everybody to do the same thing. But we really got to delve deeper into what's going to work for everyone.
And I just had something too. I noticed that you guys have been doing an awesome job with social media, because I've noticed like different elementary schools and upper elementary, like on Facebook, they have pages of their schools. So I link onto all the pages, and with the state of the district address, Dr. Hope was able to stream it live. So I know it's a lot of parents who weren't able to attend was able to view that live with the district. So they've been doing such an awesome job really getting that out to the community. And just, if you get those good positive things, just post it. I don't put any comment, I just post it out there so parents can get that information. So they've been doing a really good job at increasing the technology to get that out to the parents who might not be able to make it. Maybe they're at work and they're on their cell phones and they can see what's going on through their cell phones if they don't have the time Because it is, pretty hard with a lot of parents' hectic schedules, like you were saying before, Sally.
Madam President, I apologize to you and the rest of the board. I have to leave now. I just received a text that our granddaughter is in the hospital.
Sorry to hear that, and I hope all things go well. Please be safe as you travel that way. Were there any other questions?
Well, I guess I wanted to make a comment that, and I don't know if social media is the answer. I don't know if, it's like rock and roll, it's a passing thing. But, they used to say that. But I do believe that we have to be on the cutting edge of whatever it is and have to constantly be willing to change. Because, and probably take our key from the kids. The kids, they know.
They know how to get stuff around.
Yeah.
Well, I have to agree with Dr. Holt that we have noticed the district, since she's brought the partnerships in with the local businesses and the churches, just hearing from parents in the community how that, bringing that concept to the district has changed and how they are feeling like they're a part of that family atmosphere, because when you adopt a school, that community leader or church has made a commitment to that school for the whole year, and that has made a difference. And so I guess the main goal or the main focus is to try to make sure that every school has someone that's going to take them in. And that, I know that that's a big push in your department and what you're trying to do.
We want each school to have a faith-based, a community-based, and a financial-based institution. So we're looking to have 3 from each of those.
And that's going to make the difference. Dr. Buckle, or Mr. Ooh.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
I just gave you a new title.
We're having a party later. This is nothing that you folks haven't already considered and are probably already going to do. There's no one approach that we can take that will bring parents in. We have to try all of the approaches. Some parents are going to show up because the kid is playing in a dodgeball game, which I guess now is no longer legal. Some are going to be showing up because their kid is in a musical. And it goes on and on and on and on. And when everything is said and done, there are always those free riders. There are some parents who will never show up. And we have to live with that. And that perhaps, sir, is where you come in. We can't leave anybody behind.
Anyone else want to make a comment or question? Okay.
Mrs. Curry, what's on your department? Thank you. Mrs. Simmons.
Some of the items that we're currently working on is, as you know, we've had a curriculum instruction assessment guide. The last time that was updated was actually 2015. So the content teams, along with Kate Roll, are working on a scope and sequence, and we will have that ready to go in the fall for every grade level and every content area. So we're doing just a reset button for teachers to kind of hand them that scope and sequence at the beginning of the year to hit the ground running. Some other things that we have going on is that we are beginning to research ELA curriculums. We are in the process of working with Mr. Seth Wenzel on an instructional technology plan for the district. Literacy essential practices will all be distributed to teachers. We've invited the principals in, and we did a professional development for them on what the literacy essential practices are. And a PowerPoint has been created with the intervention specialists in the districts that the principals will share out with every staff member, and they'll do that this May. We're meeting the 3rd grade reading bill requirements, and our content leaders actually will do a presentation for you in June and bring you up to speed where we are at and where are we going in each content area.
Any questions, concerns?
ELA?
My turn. So, I'm the pink
Play.
one. So, I'm gonna just kind of speak to this document, which is the one right behind, just so you can understand how this is, how we design this for our work, and then you can go back and kind of look at it at your pleasure or leisure. We took the how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time approach. So our elephant is blue. It's all the way over on the right side. The far right is all of the blues. So when you're looking at how PLA is organizing their work, we said, You know, by the time we get to that blue, using instructional rounds as a good example, we will be operating and running instructional rounds with Fidelity in the district, from the administrator all the way to the classroom teacher. And we will be doing that well. How are we going to get there? We put some benchmarks in place, and that's what you see the pink things are. Because every year, we're gonna work towards that goal. When you see the yellow things right underneath it, that's usually processes, procedures, things that we need to put in place as well to support that benchmark. So when we do these things, we will get to that place, and we will have a nice yummy elephant in our belly. So that's kind of how we approach the work. This is a living document for us. I know Dr. Holt said that this is draft, and for us in PLA, we do this, but we also support the work of our colleague departments as well, making sure that we are infusing the appropriate professional learning for any initiative and any work that we do as an organization. Because if we don't know how to do it, then we can't do it well.
And so the third department to round out the Office of Academic Excellence is Standards Learning and Innovation, it's professional learning, and the other part is the climate, culture, and social emotional learning. So we take the academic side, the adult learning side, and the professional learning and growth. When I got in my office, and I have to give so many kudos to my predecessor. The first thing when I looked in my office, when I sat there, she said, student learning and growth through adult learning and growth. And I kept running that through my mind. Student learning and growth through adult learning and growth. How do we do adult learning and growth to get the student learning and growth? And the more I started to delve into it, we had really great things going on in professional learning, but it wasn't all put together. It wasn't all like one person didn't know what the next person was doing, and we needed to put all that together in one place and align it to the 5D, because that's our learning and growth framework and matrix. So another big piece was goal number 2. Goal number 2 for the strategic plan had to do with social emotional learning. And it was one that we said we were going to complete as of 2016-17 school year. And when I came here and I'm going, all right, everybody's talking about behavior, and goal number 2 is behavior, so where are we on goal number 2? And there were a lot of folks going, we just haven't been able to wrap our minds and hearts around that. We know it needs to be here. And as you know, that was what I learned the last 3 years. I am in no way an expert, but I did have to put a lot of effort into learning it the last few years because it was our biggest issue in my last district. And so what I learned was a lot about Castle's work and the social emotional competencies, which we adopted here in the state of Michigan. I want to say it was last summer that we adopted the Castle social emotional competencies. So everything is very, very new to Michigan right now. And so we're trying to get on the ground level of really ramping this up and using that work to address the behavioral challenges that we're seeing in the schools. So that being said, it led to the creation of an entire department to deal strategically with this work and combine it also with the special education needs that we're addressing in all 3 departments. While it lives in climate and culture, there are pieces of it in play, and there are pieces of it in what we call play and slide. But standards learning and innovation and professional learning and accountability, and then there's climate, culture, and social emotional learning. All of it dovetailing in very neatly together under the work of Dr. Thomas Hare out of Harvard. And so I studied his work, brought it to the team, and then we have Dr. Townsell here, who came from Massachusetts, and he can speak a little bit more to this and some of the data leading to his model.
Sure. First, it's a pleasure to be a part of this community. Very excited to be here. Firm believer that as culture and climate goes, so does curriculum and instruction, furthermore academic achievement. I heard Dr. Weaver talk about, hey, look, it's been 14 years, nothing's changed. What's going on? This is the game changer. When I was in the District of Columbia, we had a laser-like focus on social emotional learning, and it helped us become one of the fastest improving school districts in the country. Previously, in my last district as principal of Southbridge High School, our number one goal, number one priority area was our culture and climate, and that helped us make leaps and bounds on all categories, from PSAT to our standardized testing to our graduation rate, which is the highest it's been in the past 20 years. So right here, I believe that Dr. Holt has put together in the Office of Academic Excellence a recipe for almost guaranteed academic achievement organically coming through the social emotional learning department. It is important that every last one of our educators in this community or everybody in the community understand what the 5 core competencies are of social emotional learning. The first one is social awareness. Second being self-management. Third being, first one, self-awareness. Second, self-management. Third, social awareness. Fourth, relationship skills. And last, good decision-making. By teaching our young people to be the best possible student they can possibly be, they're going to just perform better. The young people that we have performing on the assessments are a product of their behavior. There's a correlation. If behavior is up, academic achievement is down. And on the vice versa, I've seen that firsthand. That's proven, it's evidence-based. By putting a lens on that, looking trauma sensitively, now also put a microscope on our data and look deep on the discipline. You'll see that there's disproportionalities with our young people of color. How do we, at the same time, not only build the capacity of our young people being the best students they could possibly be, but also build the capacity of our educators looking through a culturally and linguistic responsive teaching and learning lens to ensure that relationships are being built across every classroom and every schoolhouse across the district. So focusing on multi-tiered systems of support from the academic standpoint, from the behavioral standpoint, from the social emotional standpoint, game changer. Looking at everything from school climate, classroom management. Here's the issue. Our students are different. Absolutely. Technology will not go anywhere. Social media is there. And it will continue to be there. It will continue to evolve. How do we reach our young people right there? We're doing it right now with social emotional. How do we tell the parents that kids need to use social media? Through our parent toolkit, PBIS. We're going to use that and educate not only our young people, not only our educators, but reaching our families. Right now in the Office of Communication, we're putting together 20 videos that's designed to go out to the community with how to support the schoolhouse and the district with regards to social emotional learning, hitting every one of those core competencies and unpacking it where everyone can learn and understand it and continue to teach it. If you want academic achievement on an organic level, you can put Albert Einstein in the classroom with kids jumping off the wall, no one will learn anything. Facts. We're leveling up kids to be the best student they could possibly be, and we, over time, I think this is the perfect recipe for pupil and people performance right here with the culture, climate, social, emotional learning lens. That's always a subgroup under everything. People want to put discipline on the back burner. No one want to deal with it. Right now, we're dealing with it. So get prepared to level up.
Thank you. I'm ready to go
So as you look at Dr. Townsell's 5-year plan, you see that again these are drafts, and as you notice, all 5 of the 5-year plans, they're very, very left side heavy, and so we're working right now on making them spread out because everything can't come on the left side. Everything's not going to happen yesterday. But I wanted you to see these, to see the sense of urgency that exists right now in Wayne Westland. Every department feels like everything that they're doing is the most important. They're like, oh, they have to have this. Oh, they have to have this. So now comes the challenge of all of us going, uh-oh, we got to now prioritize and see how this feels at a building level. Because as a classroom teacher, I remember how it felt when everybody in district office thought they had great ideas and didn't all think it through, and how it felt to us on the site level. And we were like, okay, drinking out of a water hose now because everybody thinks their thing is the most important. So now we're going to start looking at it through the teacher's lens and what they're receiving. So last part of this is looking at the discipline data, which I'm going to let Mrs. Peck speak to.
Oh, sure. I thought I got out of that. But I'm glad because I just set this on your table. So I'm glad I have an opportunity to speak a little bit about it. So before we knew about Andre and his passion, when Dr. Holt got here, she looks at data. She looks at very specific data she's familiar with, looking at in previous districts. So she asked us to provide some of that data to her, and she just had a question mark over her head. If she had a thought bubble, it would have been a question mark. So she was looking at our behavior incidents and our suspension rates. And there's correlations there. We didn't know what they were, but there's correlations there. I've never looked at those 2 bits of information side by side. So instead of asking us about, well, why is that happening, Dr. Holt put together a climate and culture committee and asked us to study this. Could you study this and let me know what your thoughts are? So that committee was formed, and it was the craziest group of folks that I had ever met, and I adored them because they represented every single nook and cranny of our organization, from parents to students to paraprofessionals to bus drivers to administrators to teachers. So you see what I'm saying? It had everybody, and we got together several times with agenda driven. Dr. Holt helped to drive the process, but she wasn't giving us any answers. Again, she was modeling what we are, that DOK 3 and 4 level. We had to come to some conclusions. And the conclusion that we came to was that we need to understand our students and our community. And a lot of times we understand that when we know that community, if we were born into that community. If I have a knowledge and understanding of life because of the framework that I came from, that I grew up in, where I came from, what I did. I didn't have social media back then, right? I didn't have any of the many different things. Couple that on with the shifting demographics of Wayne Westland Community Schools. So our community looks different than it did 20 years ago. It feels different because all communities feel different because of the changing world effect that I think that we've all spoke to a little bit tonight. And what didn't change, though, was our perceptions, the adults' perceptions of what teaching and learning was. We weren't kind of infusing these different ideas that Dr. Townsend just kind of spoke to a little bit. Now, we didn't know all the terminology, we didn't understand, but what we did know is that we need to understand and learn our culture and climate. We need to understand what the impact is on teaching and learning, and with that, we then need to help our students understand how to be successful through social emotional learning. We just didn't know how to get there. The data that we're looking at, just so you kind of have a springboard, it says behavior incidents versus suspension consequence. I always considered behavior incidents to be, and I wrote a little note for myself, those are opportunities for learning. So when you're in a classroom setting or in a building and a student behaves in a way that is not conducive or in the best interest of themselves or the school environment, we called that a behavior incident. I called it an opportunity for learning. So some of those opportunities for learning could be talking back to teacher, or being in an unassigned area, or they're not listening, or students aren't following instructions. Those are all behavior incidents. But the real question is, there are big ones too, like fighting. I mean, we know that those are also incidents that occur. But when you look at the behavior incidents and then you compare that to the suspension consequence, because there's a consequence to every action, right? If there's a behavior incident, a consequence could be that teacher spoke to the student, administrator spoke to the student. There's different types of consequences. When you look at the percentage, and that's where the 49.7%, that's the suspension percentage. So if you had X number of incidents, 49, almost 50%, 53%, 66%, those were converting into suspensions. So for us, that once we dove into it a little bit further, we realized that we're suspending kids without really understanding why that behavior, why they were exhibiting that behavior. So all of that kind of culminated in that we need to focus on how our learning lens, understanding our young people and self, as well as students understanding their responsibility in their social emotional learning.
I had one question. So with the numbers, I'm a little confused. Is it like for fighting? Is there certain offenses with the chart going sideways, or?
Yeah, so the blue number that you see that goes across, that's just the number of incidents that we have.
Okay.
I didn't put a number at the end of it because I think the important part was no matter how many incidents we had a high percentage of suspensions that came out of those incidents. And those incidents could have been, some of them were seriously fighting. So, I mean, obviously we're not going to tolerate putting students and other students in harm's way when it comes to things like that. There's like some non-negotiables that, we have to respond accordingly. But a lot of the incidents were not of a serious nature. They might have been just not following my instructions. Well, what else could we do differently? How could we approach that differently? And that's where the social emotional learning components that Dr. Townsend was talking about, we need to rethink about our lens. Go ahead.
Do you guys might be ignorant about this, but do you guys have like in-school suspensions too, or?
We do. We do have in-school suspension rooms in the middle school. Yeah. And at the high school. Yeah.
Okay.
At the high
So
school.
I didn't know.
And we're looking at restructuring
So,
those.
so when I show you those numbers, that 50% to 66%, that includes in-school suspension. Because to us, suspension is being removed from the learning environment. And in-school suspension, you're in the learning environment, but you're not receiving instruction. You're not part of that learning process that day. So that's still considered
You're
suspension.
also not home on your skateboard.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Mr.
Exactly.
Mr. Buckaloo?
So attendance is carved out of that, that's not a part of it.
Attendance is not a piece of
Okay.
this.
And all of these things, are they within the classroom or are they within the building?
In the building, somewhere in the building, in the classroom, they're somewhere on campus.
Have you made any effort to identify where in the building these things might be taking place? Cafeterias come to my mind
Yeah.
automatically.
Yeah, they're happening everywhere. And I think that's the work that Dr. Townsend will continue to work on with teams.
But you
to-
currently haven't done a breakdown of that.
We do at some schools.
Yeah.
So right now with the PBIS program, some schools track their data via location, which is what we're supposed to do as part of positive behavior interventions and supports. You're supposed to track it by time of day of the week, location, person who's making the referral. You're supposed to track it by all of those different mechanisms. Some of our schools do, and some of our schools are still on the journey to move toward in that direction. Part of the work that Mr. John Albrecht is doing right now is how do we actually identify the data? For example, does out of assigned area mean the same thing at Glenn as it does at Wayne, that it does at Stevenson? And right now, I can tell you across the board, it does not. Nothing means the same thing anywhere. So part of his work is really helping our staff, our administrators, get to a place where does out of assigned area mean the same thing? First of all, what does it mean? How do you use it? When should you use it? And how are you tracking your information? Because honestly, this is the reason why the data is so vague right now. It's not reliable. So do we know when suspensions are happening compared to discipline incidences? Yes. Do we know now and be able to calibrate how we're using it out of assigned area versus how we're using fighting, how we define an assault? No. And until we get that data calibrated, we essentially can't really hold people accountable to it. So the first level of accountability is calibration. Everybody get on the same page. Let's look through the same set of glasses at the events that are happening at the schools, and then we can now figure out how do we discipline them accordingly. And right now, what the team figured out is we're overusing this one consequence of a suspension. There are a myriad of different things you can do. I hate to say it that way, but being a parent, there's a lot of different things you can do. I can't put my kids out, unfortunately.
Right.
And so, believe me, I want to sometimes, having 7 of them. But we do that at school, and it's not solving the problem. We're realizing we're suspending the kids, and guess what? They come back, and sometimes they're even acting worse. And so we need to try, a new mechanism. But first, we got to get a good picture on how we're using this information. How are we documenting it? Where is it all happening? And then we can move forward on it. So right now, as I tell the principals all the time, because they all get kind of nervous when we start looking at this data, this is literally taking a ground level. Let's see where we are. No holds barred, and then we'll figure it out.
Would be wonderful if we could get to a point where suspension truly was a last resort.
Yes, we have to. Because the other thing that we track at the executive cabinet level is the number of minutes. Do we do minutes or hours, Rebecca? Is it
Hours.
Hours, okay. So the number of hours that students have missed class as a result of any disciplinary matter. Because when a kid gets in trouble, they go sit in the office for a while.
Right.
So we got to track all that time. And when you get to the number of hours, we are in the over tens of thousands at this point. How are we going to educate minds that aren't there?
Right.
If they're not even in the room, you've now put yourself 10 steps behind. And so now that folks are looking at that, they're going, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, send them, if they got in trouble in second period, send them on to third period, as long as it wasn't something that, was assaulting someone or something like that, something very, very dangerous. But if it was just, okay, the kid was cutting second class, they were truant. I understand, but you found them, get their behinds to third period, and then we'll deal with it, when we get to it. Because if you're dealing with something that's going to take you an hour as an administrator, don't have that child sitting out there. Send them to class and then
Just
pull
make
them
them
out
come
and we'll
back.
give them a consequence. And the consequence, unfortunately, for missing class can't be suspension. It kind of defeats the purpose, but we do that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, okay, let's take a step back for a moment and figure out what's in our toolbox. And
Yep.
so that's what Dr. Townsend's doing with the behavior coaches, is filling our toolbox.
And one thing I like about having Dr. Townsend on our team is that some of the behavior problems could be like medical ADD. Their parents don't have the insurance to get the medication, and it's not fair for a child because of some type of mental situation to be out of class and be suspended when it's a behavior issue or not having the proper insurance to get the medication. Because I've run across cases where there's children, really good children, but they have emotional problems and they're being suspended because they can't afford to get the medication.
And let's face it, there are some kids out there that have figured out, I don't wanna be in school today, I know exactly what I have to do to get suspended,
Mm-hmm.
and how many days.
Right?
Yeah, so, you know, the students also know how to work the system, and they're kinda shocked when they do the behavior, and all of a sudden, you mean I'm not getting suspended for this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're going to the lake.
We're bringing you back to class.
I'm gonna wish you were suspended. But I do have a question, and I didn't get a chance to ask it earlier. Are we providing mentors for our teachers, our new teachers?
That's part of the work that we need to get back to. There are some teachers that are receiving mentors, and Jill Simmons could speak to this a little bit more.
Actually,
Go ahead, either one.
I'm sorry. So the mentor program kind of comes through our group. So we have 2 levels of mentors right now for the teachers. We have the district level mentors, which is the contractually negotiated mentors. They meet once a month. They're really just kind of that high level, here's how you navigate through a large instructional institution as Wayne Westland. Then this year was our first year that we put site level mentors back into play. So we used Title II money to fund that for professional learning. So our first year teachers have, our first and second year teachers have site level mentors that are in their building that are providing that support. I think each mentor can handle up to 4 mentees. And then we add another mentor. But those are those day-to-day, I'm gonna leave here and cry in my car moments that they'll coach them through and support them through. And we started that this year.
Okay, good. Because I know the way we did it before, it was like 1 person and 12.
Oh, we
And,
were
you know,
up
and
to,
that was-
because of our you know, rollover of teachers, we were up to, there could have been 35 to 40 teachers on one mentor's caseload. So Julie Rutherford came in
Which
and
means you
said,
don't
"We gotta
have
do
a
this."
mentor.
Correct.
You've got a busy person on the other end of the
Correct.
phone. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Where do these mentors come from? What are their credentialing? What are their background experience?
So they are tenured teachers in our district. They have generally worked here for at least 5 years. That's one of our requirements, that you understand the Wayne Westland as well as being a tenured teacher in the system. So you're an experienced teacher. You have to meet all of the requirements of the job posting, meaning that you are supporting the teachers. You know, you have a good working relationship with teachers. You have the ability to coach and you know, support teachers in their growth.
And there is training that they have to go through.
There is. So, yeah, our department, we meet once a month with our district and site level mentors to provide programming. We actually have, for our first year teachers, we have identified programming for the 6 district level mentors. And this year, we're also starting to work on programming for our site level mentors. That one's a little bit more flexible, but we also wanted to make sure that it had some structure around it so that we didn't miss anything with our new teachers.
Any other questions? So, the 346.18, is there another presentation that Mr.
It was real
that Dr.
quick
Townsend?
for Dr. Townsend, but we can move it to next
No,
time.
I mean, no. I just wanted, I know he gave an excellent of his job description, so I didn't know if he covered what he was
No, he
gonna
was
do.
gonna cover the coach
Okay.
model, just so you're
Okay.
familiar with
So,
it and where you hear about it.
346.18, climate and culture coach model, Dr. Townsend.
Sure, thank you. And this kind of follows up to this piece of data that you see here. Listen, things are happening. Someone say, "Oh, kids are doing stuff," but nothing's happening. No, you see more than 50% of the time, any consequence leads to an out-of-school suspension. One thing we know about suspension is that it doesn't change behavior, but it does is delays behavior. And a lot of times, these young people that are constantly suspended are considered frequent flyers. So the goal is, how do we change their behaviors? We have an opportunity to put together a framework that's evidence-based to support and employ culture and climate coaches in the schoolhouse to support principals and teachers with dealing with those high-need students, or just the entire student body with building relationships bottom line is young people don't respond when there's no relationship. So looking at the framework from safe and supportive schools model, our culture and climate coaches are going to focus on three things. That's student engagement, safety, and the environment. We have to ensure that the conditions for learning are in place. Those culture and climate coaches are there to support all of the educational leaders and all of the classroom teachers and support staff with how to build relationship with our young people, whether it's through positive behavior intervention support, whether it's through restorative practices or restorative circles, or whether it's just having group and just morning conversations with kids and just building that personal one-on-one relationship. When a young person has somebody that they can go to in a schoolhouse that they love and respect, the behavior organically changes because they respect you. They don't want to do, I don't want to do you like that because I respect you. That's how we approach it. So looking at this framework, engagement focus on relationships.
Do they have the
respect-
framework in front of them? Or?
Yes, do you guys have this in your packet?
Yeah, I think so.
No,
It should be.
we don't have that.
Oh, you will have it. We put
Okay.
one for every last one of you guys. They're going to focus on engagement, which is relationships and respect for diversity or cultural competency, and school participation. That also support our young people who are chronically absent. That's missing more than 10% of that school day. Also focusing on safety, not only physical safety or safety with regards to substance abuse, but also emotional safety. Ensuring our young people are on social media. I mean, once upon a time, you can get into a fight and forget about it, get beat up and forget all about it. Now you
On
gotta relive
YouTube.
it, and your kids got to see it. So that emotional safety, and last, that environment, looking at the disciplinary environment, wellness, physical environment, and the overall academic environment. And to support our culture and climate coaches, we're using models to train them, 6 modules that are evidence-based by the Department of Education. And also, we're rethinking discipline. The reason why, like, our young people are desensitized to suspension. They're desensitized. If anything, 5 days, you're out, no. Suspension is not a big deal. If I'm gonna give 5 days because I almost fought, I might as well fight. You're really gonna get out there. So looking at discipline, ensuring that discipline is progressive, where you respect the process. So that's the model that I like to put out as a draft. We're vetting through is the safe and supportive school model, where we have a culture and climate coach supporting every educator in the building with building relationship with young people and responding to those behaviors to ensure that over time we change those behaviors.
So we'll get them a copy of it when we get into the
I
communication
apologize, you
section.
guys should have.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Dr. Townsend. Any questions?
So it sounds like we're gonna have students now who are gonna be begging to go back to the classroom and wanna beg to go to school versus the suspension.
By the
Over
time
time,
they're
that'll be
done.
the norm.
That will, and that's exactly what happens.
Mr. Cox?
Who are these coaches? Are they educators in the building? Are they administrators in the building?
That's the goal, the vision that we have. We hope that our basketball coach that comes from out the district stick around and stay our culture and climate coach, so we ensure that you're there all day and you're there all night, really building that community. This is Wayne Westland Community Schools. We really want our people to be a part of the community and touch every aspect of the school day.
Any other questions?
So to answer your question, those positions are posted right now. The baseline criteria, we prefer a bachelor's degree level personnel, but if they do not have a bachelor's degree, that does not exclude them. And the goal with these positions is twofold. One, we have a need, and especially in our secondary schools, we have a few of our athletic or club coaches who are not members of the staff. And that's a challenge right now with our secondary schools. For example, with football. I'll give you an example with football. Coming up, I played softball. And Coach Partita is a large part of the reason I was here. I couldn't imagine if Coach Partita wasn't there when that 3rd period class happened and I might have flown off the handle. My principal knew, send me over to Coach. And Coach would take care of me, and then I could be back in my room in 15 minutes. Well, right now, if that coach is that person that student connects with, at John Glenn, we have some of that with our wrestling coach, but then you'll see it with other sports that are going, he's not here till 2 o'clock, he's not here till 3 o'clock. So that one person that child connects with isn't there yet, that's a problem. So the administrators and the athletic directors are like, well, can these positions double as being, someone during the day to coach with, and we'll train them to be a behavior coach, and then do a coach in the afternoon? Absolutely, they can. Could they be someone who is a current sitting teacher? Possibly, but the way we've structured it on the salary schedule, it's not something that would be very attractive to our educators because it's a bit lower than the starting teacher salary. Could it be someone who is a great bus driver and really has great management of their bus and can learn the pieces of restorative practices? Yes. The great piece about everything that Dr. Council is saying is it can be taught. It can be taught to our educators. It can be taught to our community members. So some of the best coaches are actually community members that we bring into the school.
You just got me thinking on something. I know some of the other districts in state and out of state do volunteer hours as a mandatory requirement towards graduation for high
Yes.
schools. Is it possible to utilize this as a piece of our component in our district and have peer participation?
So the answer is yes, absolutely. Right now, it's interesting you bring that up, Mrs. Madison, because we were just talking about this about a few months ago with the idea of our peer counseling or peer mediation groups. And we just haven't gotten it off the ground yet to get them the training that they need, but it is definitely something that we can use. Because right now, a lot of our peer groups, they talk to kids with respect to like suicidal ideation or something like that. You'll bring in a peer counselor, a peer mentor, but could we have a peer that's doing a community building circle at lunch or a conflict mediation circle? It is possible. For more sticky situations, you don't want peers involved, but we can definitely do that. And there are trainers that would come in and train our peer mediators to help with that work as well.
Maybe one of the starting points could be, I'm sure you'd be familiar, I know in California, in Laguna Hills, the students had, where they had a mentor, where they went for a small portion of the period in the day.
Advisory.
If we started that here.
We have, so some of our schools do have advisory. So for example, I want to say it's Stevenson, that they have, and they've been really using their advisory model as just that. Other schools are looking at adopting the advisory model to do just that. Is advisory a great time to do community building? Yes. But it's also, advisory can also be somewhat of a time waster. So we have to make sure that if we do bring advisory into a campus, it's done strategically and well, and that there's a curriculum surrounding it. Otherwise, it becomes a burden for everyone, especially the teachers. They do not want an unstructured time. It just doesn't become fun anymore.
Yeah, I would like to add, the advisory model must be supported by the school community. We can say we're doing it all day, but
Right.
if it's not bought in and not supported, it's a flop.
As with everything,
Yep.
starts at the top.
Any other questions, concerns? So what we're gonna do now is, this ends our portion of the study session. I hope a lot of I know it was a lot of information, but it was a lot of good information, a lot of information that we needed. We're gonna take about a 5-minute break, so about 8:10, we're gonna convene in the, conference room so that we can start our portion of our board workshop. It is open, those who are in here wanna come, you're more than welcome to come, but at this time, it's just we did a board workshop about a few months ago, with a representative from Wayne Lisa, and this is the second part of our workshop, and so that's what we're gonna do. So we'll convene in about 10 after, give everybody a chance to stretch, go to the bathroom, and then let our person that's running it get set up, and then we'll start again.
You know, you said, right?